Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm Nathan Fink, and this is New Hampshire Family Now, a show about building family in the Granite State. Today in the podcast, Director of Division for Children, Youth, and Families, Joe Ribsome, joins us to reflect on systems change in a bright Granite State future. And later, Ellen Carlson of the New Hampshire Fiddle Ensemble talks about building community through music. New Hampshire Family Now is brought to you by the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation. Since 1962, the Charitable Foundation has worked hand in hand with generous and visionary citizens to maximize the power of giving and support, collaborate, and lead innovative initiatives. Initiatives like New Hampshire Tomorrow, which is focused on making sure children and families have access to education, healthcare, and career pathways to ensure every family member thrives. To learn more about New Hampshire Charitable Foundation and all their initiatives, go to www.nhcf.org. This podcast was also brought to you by Family Support New Hampshire. Family Support New Hampshire is NH's coalition of family resource centers and family strengthening programs that exist to ensure Granite State families have access to resources so both caregivers and children can succeed, because supported families are strong families. To find a family resource center near you, visit www.fsnh.org. Hello and welcome to the podcast, our last show in April, which is Child Abuse Prevention Month, a time when we think about all the ways we can make our families and our communities stronger. Today I'm excited, and I'm not going to lie, I'm a little bit sad, to welcome New Hampshire's Director of the Division for Children, Youth, and Families, Joe Ribsome. Joe, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Nathan. Just so happy to be here. You know, the trust is great. The podcast is great. You know, I'm just thrilled to see where you've taken this over the past couple of years and, you know, moving it, you know, to a place where it's getting national attention and lots of people I hear talking about it, and it's really awesome stuff. So just thrilled to be back.
You know, I obviously mentioned that it's April, Child Abuse Prevention Month, and I'm thrilled because every April we get this chance. We get to talk about the things that make us, my family, your family, our community so much stronger. So I wanted to start in a place where, because there's pinwheels everywhere, people are wearing blue. When you see that, to your mind, what do you think?
Well, I mean, the first thing I think is that, you know, we want kids and families to be healthy, safe, and strong, right? But when I look at it from my perspective as somebody who's, you know, spent a lot of time developing systems and building systems, you know, I think about, you know, what does prevention mean to me? And to me, it's a very simple idea, much more complicated to execute, which is that we just want to make sure that kids and families have everything they need, period. You know, if we do that, we're not going to see, you know, all the terrible outcomes that we say. Of course, that's really complicated, right? Because every kid and every family has very different needs and start in very different places. And it's a much different proposition depending on who you're working with and where you're living and the context that they bring to that. For some families, that's concrete supports. For some families, it's housing. For some, it's behavioral health access. For some kids, it's behavioral health access. It's all of these many, many things, peer supports, natural supports, all of that, you know, and at the end of the day, it's also, right, a sense of community and a sense of belonging. So it's huge, simple idea, huge to execute. But I think the good thing about it being so big to execute is it means there's room for everybody to be part of it.
I want to pick up on that just a little bit, because when I think about the way then that we have to even approach the idea of a system, how does that then happen?
You know, it's nice to see in the world of, you know, of social service systems in general, there's been a real shift in the past few years in how we think about developing systems, right? And that you start your development at the point of actually engaging with the people who experience the systems, instead of starting at the point of, how are we going to fund this? Or is this what, you know, I, the director, want? But rather talk to the people who experience the system and see what is it that they really need and take it from there. And I think that's a place where I've been incredibly blessed coming to New Hampshire. I'm sure we'll talk more about this, but, you know, when I got here, things were in a tough shape. You know, people had dismantled, you know, what was a solid child welfare system, you know, in order to save $1, basically. You know, in the wake of the Great Recession, they needed to save money. They dismantled tons of social services, not just the child welfare system, but the broader social service network. And one thing somehow that remained was this program at DCOF called Better Together, which was a program that brought parents and foster parents and staff together to go through a healing process to understand the trauma that folks experience when they go through these systems, right? And the child protection system, especially when you get to the point of, you know, having to remove a child, separate a child from a family, that's a terribly traumatic thing. And I'm not naive to think that it never, ever has to happen, but it needs to happen rarely and sparingly. But that also families and folks can heal from that. And you need to have, if you have space for people to heal from that, which this Better Together program did, you create this incredibly powerful group of people who know and understand what they experienced, but then also have the ability to know and understand how that impacts the system design as a whole and programs and everything else. So I was just so lucky that I got here, and there was this team of people who had already lived this and done this that I just got to start to meet with and talk with and put on our, every time we were deciding what programs, having a focus group of those folks to tell us like, which model do we want to use when we're talking about, our behavioral healthcare system and how do we want that to interact with families, and juvenile justice transformation and how do we want the juvenile justice system to interact with families, and thinking about, the things that our families say about what would have been better than what they experienced.
I keep thinking now about this idea of rupture and repair. We will always rupture in our relationships, maybe in our journeys and our travels, right? How we repair is actually going to be the foundation of where we go.
Absolutely.
And then you kind of cast that over the whole idea of a system, a human system built for humans. So no question, but it does bring to mind even screening in.
Right.
Yesterday, I was on a call with the Friends Network who was presenting a lot of Chapin Hall's studies, research, some interesting data in there to talk about, how we separate out abuse from neglect, a bifurcated system that was originally meant to keep two things apart. But they were also talking about an example out of Vermont, one of the highest reporting state where neglect is concerned, with the lowest screened in rate for intervention on the systems level.
Yeah. A couple things have happened over, decades and decades, right? You had social service systems that had been, we've seen this acutely in the past 10 years here in New Hampshire, but this goes back for decades, right? Kind of fundamentally shifted away from kind of the idea of having a social worker who had the ability to actually engage with families and meet their needs to this idea of, are you eligible for assistance? And when you shifted that, right, and we, it's even in the language that we use, right? We talk about people who determine eligibility, not people who help people. When you shifted that, you kind of took the humanity out of it and you put it into this, this checkbox, this checklist of ways that you determine, the deserving from the undeserving. And you've inserted a lot of tough stuff in there in terms of judgment and racism and everything else that kind of weeds, people apart and doesn't actually end up getting people the things that they need. And when that happened over time, child protection systems, because they are the system of last resort, and this was true in New Jersey too, right? They've grown into just trying to meet all types of needs that they were never built for. They're built to deal with abuse and neglect. That's what they're built to deal with. And that's what they're mandated to deal with. But they're then instead expected to deal with hosts of issues, right? From substance use disorder to mental health treatment to, anything, housing. And what ends up happening is then the child protection system becomes the entry point to those types of interventions and supports for families. So in order for families to get help, they need to come to this place that is naturally going to be scary. And it's not because the people who work in child protection want to be scary. It's because we're designed to be that crisis response system if a child's actually being abused. And we instead are being used as the front door for services for families. So those families, no matter how hard we try to engage, they're still going to be afraid because the power imbalance is just such that they'd be foolish not to be afraid. So instead, what you need to do is think about how do you unwind all that? How do you pull all that out of your child protection system and put it into the places where it really belongs so that, again, you can get back to the very simple idea of this is what a family needs and this is what I'm going to give them, and get out of all this investigation, nonsense, judge, court stuff, except in those very, very rare instances where that's really necessary for safety. And most of our work, it's really not necessary for safety. It's really families that just need help and they're getting into our system to get help.
Am I wrong in thinking because of the way this system had been built for whatever reason, which we'll get into, we are now looking at eligibility as the determiner whether or not I get services? So I then, as a person, as a family, am essentially embody or become the thing that I am trying to be eligible to receive for services, which is a dehumanizing process.
Yeah.
So I am now my challenge. But that then is in response to something, which is where I want to start, because you said earlier there's some economic considerations. What were those decisions and what did they arise from?
I think similar stories can be told all over the country, but I'll talk about New Hampshire because that's where we are in that.
Yeah.
So I came here in October of 2017. Shortly after the Great Recession in 2010, there was a decision made to greatly cut back the social service systems in this state. In the wake of a Great Recession, right, at the time when families need the most help, the response was to withhold help, pull help away as much as you could. And the thinking behind that, I'm sure, was that tax revenues are down. We need to save some money. The problem with that is that if the families aren't getting what they need, those problems compound over time. The other thing that happens at that point is the opioid crisis hits. So you've reduced the ability to respond to these challenges, and you've increased demand on these systems. And the systems break, right? They can't do it anymore, right? And that's pretty much where we were, when I got here 5 or so years ago, and that the state hadn't at that point really made any major investments to try to rebuild what was taken away, much less to try to go further. And they were dealing with, radically increased demand stemming out of the opioid crisis. So what happens with that is the ways in which you design these systems to reduce, to reduce kind of the spend ends up making them more and more coercive and scary. So to be specific about that, one of the things that happened in New Hampshire was they decided to eliminate what were called voluntary services for DCYF involved families. Right. So that was the ability to, if we had a family and they had a need, that we could do something to help. Literally, we were not funded or authorized to provide help to a family in need. Even though we would do an assessment that said that you needed to help this family needs help, we weren't authorized to do it unless we went to court, made a finding of abuse or neglect, and got a court to order those services. And right, if you structure a system that's supposed to help people around the idea that you need to go to court and prove that they need help for people, you're not going to be helping people. And what ended up happening in reality was, we do an actuarial tool to identify risk, and about a third of our families really needed substantial help, but only about 5 to 10% were going to court and getting any help at all. And our staff experienced that they were assessing that 20% of the people we worked with needed really intensive supports. And at the end of the day, we were closing their case and sending them a letter. And that doesn't feel good for the staff either.
Like eligibility, voluntary versus involuntary, coercive is a interesting path to consider.
One of the other things that happened here is that it then starts to impact culture and the way that people think about the work. In that context, right, the state of New Hampshire decided to commission a report to come in and investigate what's wrong with it. It actually was a solid report, but the takeaway that the public had from the report was dead wrong. And I experienced this within, I think it was like 2 months after I came in. I was on a show on live radio on National Public Radio in New Hampshire, and a clip was played for me of an influential member of the community. I don't want to name them, basically saying that the takeaway from the report was that DCYF does a good job of removing kids from their families when kids are abused, but does a really poor job of removing kids when they're only being neglected. And that was the takeaway from this report, was that we needed to remove more kids when there's neglect happening. Was shocking to me from where I came from in the system that I worked in. Because, of course, the right solution to that problem is we need to be supporting families and strengthening families to stop those things from happening in the first place. And that a removal is always a bit of a failure of the system, right? If the goal is to try to preserve families and strengthen families, which it should always be the goal. And again, I want to be careful. I'm not saying that there's never instances where children need to be removed for their safety, but it's much rarer than what happens in the way these systems work. But if we're looking at it from the goal of removal as the outcome, as opposed to preserving and strengthening families, then we're gonna be doing damage left and right.
We clearly, though, have traveled some distance toward solution, which is what I want to talk about. So can you kind of give us the sense of now, where have we come in terms of that solution?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've come a very long way, but we're not done. And the truth is, I've not seen a system where anybody is done, right? If we think about how do we serve families and how do we serve them in a way that is supportive, that helps identify needs. One of the good places to look is the work that we've done on the children's behavioral health care side. When I first arrived here, there really wasn't a children's behavioral health care system to speak of. You look back at 2008, there's a 10-year mental health plan that was published. The word child wasn't used one time in that report, as if children don't have mental health needs that need to be met. I was very lucky when I got here is that there was a group of people that were really actively involved in this space and actually knew where they wanted to go, but needed some political will and assistance to get the ball rolling. But back then, essentially, DCYF was the de facto children's behavioral health care system. So if a parent had intensive needs for behavioral health care, the only way they can get them met, unless they were independently wealthy and could afford to just pay for whatever, which most people aren't. Even, upper middle class people can't afford to just pay out of pocket for all those types of things. Unless they were, able to pay privately for all that stuff, the only pathway was to come through DCYF. And that pathway, came in 3 different ways. You could either come to us as a child abuse and neglect case, and parent would be seen as a neglectful parent because they can't manage their children's behavioral health care needs. Again, we're talking about medical needs for kids, and we're going to say parents are neglectful because they can't manage them. Or the juvenile justice system in 2 different ways, either through a delinquency petition because a child's behaviors, which are often being triggered by trauma and behavioral health care needs, are bringing the attention of law enforcement, or through what we call the D2 child in need of services process, whereby a parent would have to go to court and tell a judge that their child was so dangerous and out of control that the court needed to order them into services.
That's a hard pathway to even begin to fathom.
They're all hard, right? Even the neglect pathway, right? And we had lots of parents who would say, you know what, sign me up. I neglected my kid because that was the only way they could get services, which is awful. That's a parent who's willing to take on the scarlet letter just because they want to help their kids. Amazing parents who were willing to take that on just to get help. And, instead, the right thing to do is you don't need a court. You just need to look at these needs and meet these needs. So I'm really, really heartened, and similar things have happened in other parts of the system, but particularly the children's behavioral health system, that now they don't need to come to DCYF. Parents can call to have mobile crisis and have a clinician at their house within an hour to kind of get the ball rolling. If they need, some assessments to understand what's wrong with the child, we have assessors that can go out and assess mental health needs. We have what's called the Fast Forward program, where they use a high fidelity wraparound model where the child themselves or the youth and the parent are the center of the process. And the clinician's job is to really bring the professionals together, bring the families together, and bring everybody else together to try to figure out how do we get this kid's needs met. And at any given time, we have now, where it used to be, 0, we now have at any given time about 500 kids involved in that Fast Forward program, who historically, the only pathway to care would have been through a DCYF case in the past.
Okay, we're building towards these solutions, but clearly, like any system, obviously there's going to be gaps, right? But there's also going to be things on the horizon that we're looking to still accomplish. Yeah. So where do we still need to go?
There's still much more to do. One thing that I'm super excited about that's in the immediate term horizon is our expansion of work with kinship caregivers, specifically for kids who do end up getting involved with DCYF. So we have in New Hampshire about 1/3 of our kids who come into DCYF's formal care and custody end up with kinship providers, right? That could be relatives, or it could be other folks who know and love the child and have an existing relationship with them. But in a lot of jurisdictions, you can see those numbers, closer to 50%, 70%. And, there's a couple key differences between the systems that have been able to push that far and where we were. And, I think we're well along the way to solving that. There's a couple big things. So one, how do you make sure that you make it easy for kin to become licensed foster care providers? And that's important because that's kind of, it gets back to the first issue we talked about, which is money, right? And as much as we don't want money to be the driver of all of this, these systems are funded through federal dollars that have rules behind them, and having a licensed caregiver is a requirement to be able to get the foster care subsidy, right? So we have to be able to license them, but we want to be able to do that in a way that makes more sense for kin, right? There are some things that might make sense if you're talking about licensing a standard foster home, right? That you're only going to want, a certain size of room and, only so many kids in a room, potentially 1 kid, maybe 2 kids, depending on the size. Where if you're talking about a kid going to grandmom, the room size maybe is not nearly as important as the fact that this kid's going to get to be with grandmom. So, we can waive some of those requirements for grandmom to make sure she can get her license. And then once she's licensed, she can get the subsidy and can afford to actually care for these kids. The other thing, though, that goes along with that is, right, how do we find these kids? Right. The truth is that when a child protection case starts, DCYF is the scary entity that's involved, and a parent is maybe not in a place that they really want to start engaging with us on that. And, one way to go about that, and one way that we're close to going about that, is by contracting with somebody else who can be kind of a neutral party, can come in on terms that the parent is more comfortable with and understands, and then have that person start to have these conversations with the family about, who are the people that are important in your life, and talking to the kids themselves. Who's important in your life? If you're worried, who do you pick up the phone and call? And those are the people we want to work with, and then providing longer term supports for those folks. So in addition to the subsidy, helping them navigate those changed relations that they're going to have, right? If you're grandmom one day and the next day you're all of a sudden mom, that's a different feeling for everybody in that situation.
It goes to me right back to the very first thing that we talked about, which is kind of putting the human back in the human system, reintroducing, and this almost feels like it's anathema, these two things, oil and water, because as you systemize, you are starting to use this kind of system speak, eligibility, all these different things, which becomes the people. But if we can reintroduce humanity back, which, by the way, does cost money. That brings me to one of the greatest factors of keeping the system, bringing the system back, and then keeping it where it needs to be to make sure that we preserve humanity, families, and caregivers and children in their future, is how do we sustain this in the minds of ourselves and our lawmakers who we elect?
Right. How do we prevent it from happening again? I think there's a few things that we've tried to build in. I mean, one big part of it's relational, right? And it's actually making sure those lawmakers are not these nameless, faceless people, but are actually involved in the work. And one thing that we did when I first got here was we took a group, Casey Family Program supported this for us, took a group to New Jersey to see how their system of care worked and to see how their child protection system worked. And we spent, 3 days kind of going deep on what this looks like. And we came back and folks were bought in. They were committed. And since that day, that same kind of core group of people have been behind moving tons of work forward to the point that, the trust is such that, we can make a call, and say, hey, we really need to bring legislation to push this thing. All of these major system changes really kind of came through that same core group. Again, it's not just that they all went on a trip, but it's because they all spent time together and they all cared about the issues and they all knew each other and they all trusted each other. And, finding ways to do more of that and making sure that, it's not us versus the legislature. It's how do we get the legislature in with us? And the other key part is making sure you have folks from both parties involved, right? This is not about partisanship. This is about kids and families. And we found great support on both sides of the aisle for tons of initiatives through that. And I think, that's something that needs to be sustained. And if we do it, I think we can keep pushing further.
The fact that you've announced that you are now joining the Annie E. Casey Foundation, I want to talk about that briefly, but first acknowledge this is a perspective that I'm really going to miss, and I think New Hampshire is really going to miss. So congratulations.
Yeah, I mean, it's it is a really exciting opportunity. I'm still kind of more in the space of mourning, the movement from where I'm currently at, because there's just so much amazing stuff that's happened and is happening and is still teed up to happen. And I'm confident that it's going to survive and that people are going to step up to keep it going. But yeah, it's just one of those opportunities that's just, phenomenal for somebody, like me, who's been working in this space for most of my career for the past 15 years and in public, child welfare and children's behavioral health and juvenile justice leadership, both in New Jersey and New Hampshire. Yeah, so the role is their director of child welfare and juvenile justice policy, which, is a role that allows, me to be part of that national conversation regularly around, what should these policies and laws look like in terms of, and from my perspective and from the foundation's perspective, in terms of doing the things that we're talking about today, really shifting the way that we work with kids and families away from these coercive interventions and towards supportive interventions that we know work better. And, will give me an opportunity to work in other jurisdictions and, kind of help them, move along in this same journey.
Obviously we're losing you, but it is a win for the perspective. It's a win for policy across the board.
Yeah.
Congratulations. You're going to be missed, but congratulations.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been wonderful. The trust is wonderful. The work you guys are doing is just unbelievable. And, so proud to have been a part of it for the past few years. And I'm sure we'll keep connecting, in the years ahead.
And when we come back, Ellen Carlson joins us. Don't go anywhere. Many thanks to New Hampshire's Office of Social and Emotional Wellness for sponsoring this podcast. Started within New Hampshire's Department of Education, the Office of Social and Emotional Wellness consolidates policy development and implements projects and programs that are focused on health and wellness with an emphasis on behavioral health of all students, youth, and families. To learn more about the Department of Education and its many programs and approaches, visit www.education.nh.gov. Today's show was also brought to you by Burgoo Media, a full-service media company dedicated to helping nonprofits realize impact stories for print, video, social, and legacy media, and more. Both budget-conscious and grant-friendly, Burgoo Media helps your organization celebrate the humans in human services. Learn more at burgoomedia.com. Hello and welcome back to the second half of our show, where I'm joined by Ellen Carlson of the New Hampshire Fiddle Ensemble. Ellen, welcome to the show.
Hey, how are you? Thanks for having me.
I'm super excited to talk to you today because I know that you're about to run your first show for the spring season, and for which you donate quite a bit of the proceeds to the prevention of child abuse in the community. And the entire purpose of what you do is to bring community together through music. Why is music such a great table to sit at while building community?
Yeah, well, people come together, they're playing music together, everything else, that's going on in their lives, and everything is just kind of put aside and people are communicating in a different way that kind of goes a little bit deeper. And we have so many people who just walk out of the rehearsals and playing that this is amazing. This is fun. I've never had an experience like this. And yeah, I don't think it's hard to put words to put it down.
Yeah. So what is the New Hampshire Fiddle Ensemble?
Yeah. So the New Hampshire Fiddle Ensemble is a group of not just fiddlers. We started with trying to promote fiddle music and what fiddles can do in general. But of course, we need guitar players and mandolin players and banjo players and harps and all kinds of other supporting instruments who are supporting to us. But now they've become, a pretty integral part in what we do. And we have 7 different groups throughout New Hampshire and Maine who get together in small groups of, say, I think the smallest group might have been 12 this year, but the largest group was like 36. So they get together in these groups and they rehearse music on their own that we provide to them, and we teach them by ear, which means we play a little piece and they play it back to us. We play a little piece, they play it back to us. We say, okay, guitars, you're on an A chord here. Fiddles, you do this. Mandolins, you can do this. Banjos, do this. And then we just go back and forth. And we do provide written music for them to, help them learn. We provide recordings. They learn all this music. And then we come together in large groups and we do 5 concerts throughout New Hampshire and Maine. And we try to do a lot of our concerts to help other organizations out, because through our concerts, we offer a place where, for example, the New Hampshire Children's Trust can get more exposure, because we're offering a concert and you can be promoting what you're trying to do.
There's folks of every age group in this particular ensemble. Am I wrong?
No, that's the one thing I love about this. And the one reason we connected with the Children's Trust to begin with is because we have similar overall missions. And that is to, promote family and community. That we can have, a mom and a daughter playing together in the same group. Or we have this neighborhood in Lee where there's 7 people within, like an eighth of a mile of each other. They can walk to each other's houses and play because they know all this music from the fiddle ensemble. And in that neighborhood, we have a, I think, 10-year-old, and we have 77. I'm not sure how old he is. They're all learning the same music. And so, there's the community. We have 3 members of the same family in that little community of people. It's people of all abilities, all backgrounds.
It strikes me as a truly multi-generational approach to community, which I suppose, to your mind, why is that such an important thing when gathering for community?
The older people get the energy and the fun and the spunk from the younger kids, and the younger kids learn how to behave in a responsible, mature manner by watching the older people, and they learn respect about, how to respect people of different ages. They also see, oh, well, look at that person who's older, who's been playing for 40 years, and I can aspire to be like them. But there's that other older person who's only been playing for 1 year and learning just like I'm learning, from the young kid's perspective. And then the older people can look at the younger kids going, geez, I wish I was younger when learning this stuff, but they inspire them too. It's just all, it's a good community.
And if people want to learn more, where can they go?
Yeah, I think we have a great website. It's nhfiddleensemble.org.
Well, Ellen, I so appreciate your time. Thank you so much for coming on the show today, and thank you for all the work you do in the community.
Great. Thank you, too. We appreciate it.
And you can hear the Fiddlers in concert this Sunday, April 30th at 2 p.m. at the Westbrook Performing Arts Center in Westbrook, Maine. Saturday, May 6th at 7 p.m. they'll be at Star Theatre in Kittery. Sunday, May 7th at 2 p.m. they'll be at the Derryfield School in Manchester. Saturday, May 20th at 7 p.m. they'll be at the Exeter Town Hall. And Sunday, June 4th at 2 p.m. they will be at the Franklin Opera House in, of course, Franklin, New Hampshire. Many thanks to the Samuel P. Hunt Foundation for sponsoring this podcast. Established in 1951, Samuel P. Hunt Foundation is a Manchester-based, independent nonprofit that provides grants primarily for the arts, children and youth services, faith-based organizations, educational institutions, healthcare, and human services. This podcast was brought to you by Nixon Peabody, who delivers exceptional legal services for clients in the community by combining high performance, an entrepreneurial spirit, deep engagement, and an unwavering commitment to a culture of collaboration, diversity, and humanity. Nixon Peabody works with universities, hospitals, and nonprofits of every size to maximize impact. For more information, visit nixonpeabody.com. Today's show was also brought to you by Merrimack County Savings Bank, who proudly supports the mission and efforts of New Hampshire Children's Trust. Founded in 1867, Merrimack has served people, businesses, nonprofits, and municipalities in central and southern New Hampshire for over 155 years by treating everyone with care, respect, and compassion. Visit your local offices in Bow, Concord, Kentucky, Hooksett, and Nashua, or go to www.themerrimack.com.
New Hampshire Family Now is listed on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and more. Listen wherever you get your podcasts or ask your smart speaker to play New Hampshire Family Now.